So in this video, I am going to go through the Bible, at least a couple of spots, where I think it's not necessarily referring to lucid dreaming, but it's at least implicit in the text. Because surprisingly enough, I haven't found much about this on the internet. And I can sort of understand why, but then again, not really. I want to be pretty clear about what I'm actually looking for. It's just in the instance where I'm reading about somebody in the Bible having a dream, I want to find any evidence pointing to the fact that they're aware that they're in a dream at the time of being in a dream, because that's what it is. What better place to start than the beginning in Genesis? This is where Jacob was. He's headed toward Haran. I'm not sure where he was. For some reason, I always think he's in the desert whenever I think about this story, but I don't know if that's true or not. It just says, and he came to a certain place and stayed there that night, because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. I think he's headed toward his uncle's house right now. I don't know. This is Genesis 28, verse 12. It says, "And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said," and this is the part that's really interesting, "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad the west and the east." And yeah, it goes on. The part that is interesting to me is the land on which you lie. Like, that's God in Jacob's dream, referring to his sleeping body, like drawing attention to it. I mean, for anybody that's done a little bit of lucid dreaming, that's about as clear of a dream sign as you're going to get, straight from the mouth of God. And the reason I'm really doing this is because there's a vague idea. If you search for lucid dreaming associated with the Bible on the internet, all you get is like, is it demonic, and is lucid dreaming satanic? I get it because it's sort of, the experience is, it's almost like a psychedelic experience, I think. I've never had a psychedelic experience, so that's an ignorant thing for me to say, but it's so otherworldly, it's bananas. When you're really, like, I mean, for me it was anyway. I don't know, a lot of people, it just seems to be totally mundane to them, but I can understand why more conservative type people might think it's like some sort of a satanic practice. But I think in this story, God's just mentioning to Jacob, like, oh, hey, you know how you're asleep? It's just a passing thought, like, hey, you're in a dream right now. Me and you both know this, or at least I know this. I'm not saying that Jacob was necessarily lucid here, but God was calling his attention from inside of the dream to the fact that he was asleep and dreaming. I believe that would be God leading Jacob into temptation, if lucid dreaming, if being aware of the fact that you're in a dream while you're dreaming is a sinful thing to do, or some sort of satanic practice. Other than that, I don't think I really need any more evidence. But we are going to head over to Daniel. Okay, this is chapter 7 in Daniel. And this is about when Daniel had some crazy ass visions and shit. And I'm not going to be breaking down Daniel's visions and trying to interpret that shit. But I mean, if you're like a spiritual person and you've kind of written off the Bible, it's a big shame, really, because Daniel is one of the most interesting people I think history's ever written about. The dude was like Hebrew royalty, and he got taken into Babylon with some other like real high-ranking kids, like dudes who were really educated and shit, and he was taken into Babylon. The guy ended up being the head of an astrological priesthood. It was like a hereditary thing where you had to be like, born into it, kind of like the Levites of the Hebrews. And he ended up, because of how impressive he was, being the head of that priesthood. And that ended up being the priesthood that followed the star to Jesus. Like it was those wise men. Those wise men were a part of the priesthood that Daniel was the head of in Babylon. This is pretty intriguing. This is the first verse. It says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions of his head as he lay in his bed." And I think that's really interesting, the distinction between a dream and visions of his head. I don't know what it means, but He's drawing a clear distinction between dreams and visions of his head, which, I mean, shit, I have no idea. I mean, I could go on and read all this shit. He goes on to talk about, like, all those crazy, like, sea monsters and lions that fly and become, they're given the mind of a man and shit. It's bananas what he's seeing in this dream. But the part that's really intriguing to me, and I think is kind of a slam dunk for what I'm looking for in here in the Bible. I mean, this is shit. I don't know if you could just call this a lucid dream. This is like some sort of a lucid dream, astral projection / spirit communication shit. He's doing a lot of crazy stuff here. Right here at the end of it, well, not exactly the end, but verse 15, he says, "As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious." I bet if you read this whole chapter, you'll understand why he was anxious. But he says, "And the visions of my head alarmed me." This is really interesting. Verse 16 says, "I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretations of the things." So here's Daniel at the end of this, like, psychedelic sounding vision quest. I'm not saying he was on psychedelics. He clearly wasn't. He just laid down, and I mean, he had this crazy spiritual astral travel. I mean, if you don't like those words, then whatever, that's fine. I mean, call it whatever you want. Daniel was laying down in his bed and had one of the most astounding spiritual experiences in the history of mankind. And he sees this dude over here while he's freaking out, this being. Clearly he was speaking to, like, a spiritual being there. He was on this spiritual plane seeing all this crazy shit, and he just he doesn't seem to be bothered by the idea of just going talk to this guy. I mean, like, what the hell am I looking at, dude? What was this? And the being, the entity that he's speaking to, just explains it to him. He almost just takes it for granted, his awareness of what's going on. I mean, you get a real sense of autonomy with Daniel here. He's purposefully asking this spirit about this thing that he saw in his head, or these many things that he saw in his head. He's very aware of what's going on. I mean, he makes all these insane distinctions between dreams and visions of his head and stuff. I mean, and I can see no issue that the Bible has with Daniel understanding what's going on while he's having this experience. You get the sense, reading this whole passage, that this is a fairly common occurrence, this type of experience for Daniel, and the reason that he's writing it down is because this one was super freaky. But I want to take it back to Genesis again. I'm going to go back to Jacob, chapter 31 of Genesis. It starts at verse 10. This isn't quite as strong, but it's I think it's pretty interesting. It says, "In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up," this is Jacob talking, "I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled." And I've wondered about this before. I'm going to look it up at some point, but you see this phrase a lot in the Bible. People say, "I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream." Like, that's a really strange phrase. I mean, if you think about the way that people tend to have, like, what they call a wake-induced lucid dream. I've wondered about that phrase before. Anyway, Jacob says, "Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, 'Jacob,' and I said, 'Here I am,'" which sort of conveys some awareness of his current situation. "And he said, 'Lift up your eyes and see, all the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you.'" I want to know what "lift up your eyes" means in, like, the original languages. I'm going to look that up. Oh, shit, if I get enough views on here, somebody, if you know, put it in the comments. That'd be awesome. "I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise and go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred." I just thought that was interesting that God, like, hollered back to that time that Jacob was having that dream about him. It was apparently in Bethel. We came full circle. Now we know where we started. All right, yeah. Subscribe and like this. Thank you.